Today, I'm going to be focusing on how the fabric of the cosmic web, in particular, the Shiv layer of the cosmos, and its structure, and how Dharma is the fabric of it, and also how we can see Dharma show up in the Shakti layer of the cosmos, and what that means and how it relates to how we need to carry our lives, and why something at a cosmological level has any relevance to us at a human level in our day-to-day lives. So first, we'll start off simply by defining what is dharma. From a human perspective, it is the duty and purpose of our soul. It's why we were born, our innate search for what it means to be alive, the meaning of our essence. It requires processes that lead us to our self-realization, and it'll actually be a total alignment and unity of your personal will and cosmic will, which we'll touch on more. So your personal will, they call it ikcha, which is Sanskrit for desire. It starts out with some degree of falsehood and illusion that's placed upon you by society, friends, family, the media, etc. And I don't want to say that these people or these entities are necessarily ill-intentioned, but it does naturally come from a projection of who they are and what they know the world to be. Also, aligning with cosmic will, because there's a lot of different ways I think faiths will go about explaining this topic. They'll say that, you need to, there's your plan and then there's God's plan, and everyone has their definition of what that looks like. And it almost sounds like it's a contradiction, but actually, it is a unified force. So by living in Dharma, you aren't renouncing or rebuking the things that you deeply love and your unique expression of the universe going through you. It is just a realization of it after working through any form of, what's been put upon you. And you will not only achieve things that are for your benefit, but also for the benefit of others. So when I'm talking about how it's a fabric of the cosmic web, I am referring to the Shiv layer of the cosmos, cosmic consciousness, and my previous videos do talk about the Shiv and Shakti layer a little bit more in detail, so I'm building upon that structure here. So to recap, the Shiv layer is the unmanifest consciousness potential layer, that from which everything arises in the cosmos. The Shakti layer is the manifest physical expressive layer. So in our last talk, one of the last talks, we actually spent time legitimizing that consciousness is a legitimate layer of our reality, of our universe. And now we are going to take a look at an overview of the structure of Shiv in the cosmos, just wanting to kind of point out that there are going to be foundational aspects that come from esoteric cultures and wisdom so that we can at least lay a foundation of what it looks like. And then future talks will take that and build upon it in a more technical way, in a more personable way. So I actually came to the conclusion that Dharma is a fabric, like using that term of the Shiv layer of the cosmos. And it has its own way also of manifesting in the Shakti layer, but it actually came from personal experience. There's only so much I think books can teach, and there's so many different professions out there where you can learn so much and, intellectualize it, but personal experience will truly help embody. And so I've always, ever since I can remember, had this obsession that was relentless with the universe and darkness, in particular, darkness in the mind. And it manifested in multiple ways through my youth and like the stories I like to listen to, little stories I like to write, people I would spend time with, just if the more messed up you were, the more interesting you were to talk to. And then around college time, when it was time to decide what to major in, I wanted to major in astrophysics, but was denied co-signing on the loan for it because the return on investment would have been terrible. I would have to pursue a PhD or compromise my ethics by working in like the aerospace corporate complex. So when I was 16, I was very teary-eyed looking up at the sky and like choosing a more money-making major for college. But I had a promise that one day I was going to return, that this wasn't over, and that one day I would fully understand the mechanics of the cosmos. And so I was living a life until then of adharma, which is kind of the opposite of your purpose and misalignment. But what I want to point out is that on a note for everyone, in order to kind of realize your dharma, it doesn't mean everything is miserable and terrible up until that point. You can kind of think of it as like little building blocks and like little cosmic nudges that you want to like think about. What is a pattern that keeps repeating in your life? What is an interest that you continue to have? And sometimes even building up to realizing and stepping fully into your dharma requires you to have very unique experiences so that you can kind of weave those threads together and on the topic of fabric and on the topic of weaving, denoting that this is coming from the philosophy of Tantra, which can be seen as like a loom about weaving cosmic consciousness into your human consciousness. And it has its way of materializing. So there's no pressure that, out the gate when you're born, you need to be necessarily living this way. But until I quiet quit my software engineering six-figure job at a really big name company, I was not, I was like revolting at a soul level. I've always said that I wanted to be one with the cosmos, and I was really dissatisfied when I would hear people say things like, well, of course, that is something that you are because you're technically made of the same things in a physical sense. And of course, I always knew this, but I felt that there wasn't a relationship that I was able to cultivate that almost felt intimate or romantic. And so that's when I realized experientially I was not in the relationship with the universe that I wanted to be in. And that is when I had to kind of come to terms with learning more about the Shiv layer. Um, and so when I wasn't experientially connected to the universe, that simply meant not living my purpose. Because I could go to like planetariums and stuff like that all day, but that just didn't make me feel connected. So connected to the universe doesn't necessarily have to look one particular way. It's just living out the unique embodiment of you. And now I am one with the cosmos. And so on the topic of entropy in particular, because that is the theme we're going to spread into the Shiv layer as well, when we talk about Dharma and the fabric. So first, let's talk about entropy, but let's talk about it in the way we know it in society today, in science today. But we'll define Shakti. It is the manifest reality, what we study with thermodynamics, expressed consciousness, the expressed physical form of consciousness. And from a micro to macro scale, how can we see entropy appear? So, like when we think about atoms, atomic structures decay, and there's definitely ways that they contribute to disorder in the environment, and they undergo spontaneous decay as well. For plants, their structure also changes. Their leaves wither, the fruits can rot, and eventually they, decompose. And there's like a circle of life involvement over here, but again, like that specific structure of what you know tends to also like go away. Same thing with animals. They're aging. There's a loss of function. They die just like human beings. We also die. There's a little more consciousness attached to it too. We lose our memory. And even cultural structures can fall apart. So we're just kind of looking at things not just from an individual level, but maybe even a collective level. And when it comes to the solar system, this structure will not last forever either. The stars burn through their fuel and eventually die. And the planets themselves individually, before that even happens, have their own geological atmospheric changes. And eventually the solar system entirely collapses. Galaxies as well, there's collisions. Black holes end up consuming this matter. It takes a long time, but it happens. And at a very large scale, there's different theories about how our universe will end. Heat death is pretty popular, but just anything that illustrates large scale entropy that guides cosmic evolution. And I don't want to discriminate and call something necessarily bad or good here. This is all just the natural, it really is a cosmic evolution of how things happen. The only reason we call something bad or good is because we're attached to what the idea of being human is like, and that kind of ensures our survival. Now that we've talked about what we know in entropy and what it's and how it's been studied in Shakti, of course, the same goes for both layers. They just show up differently. So, what does it mean to see entropy manifest in the Shiv layer of the cosmos. What does entropy of consciousness, what could it look like? So this is where my cultural understanding of the yugas really tapped in, and I think it's a fascinating distinction. So we have a concept of yugas, and yugas are just a unit of time that represent an age of the world or a period of our civilization and what we're undergoing. And there are four different types, starting in order with Satya, then Treta, Dwapara, and the Kali Yuga, and they go in order and they come back. I believe the term is pralaya. Pralaya. It is what happens after the Kali Yuga ends, and it's a complete dissolution of the cosmos until it entirely resets and we start again from the Satya Yuga, and it goes on and on. So again, even when I'm about to describe what these yugas and how they show up as, just know that they're a natural progression of the order the cosmos take. So looking at the Satya Yuga, obviously with the photos, it looks pretty positive. The Dharma level is 100%. This is crazy. The human lifespan apparently was 100,000 plus years. That is crazy to me. Environmental conditions, pristine nature, no pollution, forests were thriving, rivers were pure, the air had divine energy to it. There was kind of like a consistency with the weather, documented, no extreme seasons, and Earth was always producing things that you would need to consume. And there was no scarcity. Everything was healthy and in abundance. Now, how humans were behaving or how they appeared in the Satya Yuga, everybody was spiritually realized. They were vibrating at the frequency of Shivoham. Shivoham is just a more direct term for self-recognition, which just means I am Shiva. It just means that I am the infinite. People had siddhis. Siddhis are supernatural abilities, and oftentimes this is dismissed as metaphysical. I think so is quantum biology, but it's just not studied well enough. But just being so in flow with the cosmos that you were able to do things that at our level we could not. Like they had the ability to communicate telepathically, they could levitate. I'm not sure what shape shifting looks like, but apparently that was also a part of their siddhis and their abilities. They didn't need organized religion because if you think about it, if you're in direct communion with the cosmos, you are connected to source, you are connected to divinity. No one really needed to explicitly have food to survive. They lived on pure prana, life force. There is a term for people, I think, today that do this. I think they're called breatharians. No food, no water. They're just so I'm just not sure what they look like. They have to somehow be getting energy by not interacting with human beings, being in darkness. And I think there is this element that there are people that are still alive today, actually, that are able to have the experience and the symptoms of Satya Yuga, even right now in the current Yuga we're in, which I will get to. So yeah, since everyone followed Dharma, why would you need a structure for rulers, laws, or police? The next stage is the Treta Yuga. So now you can notice the trend here. The Dharma level is kind of declining. This is not a fixed number. This is just kind of like an estimate. The human lifespan, still crazy, 10,000 plus years. Environmental conditions, the earth is still fertile, but seasons begin to shift. To shift means the aspect of a season existing kind of comes into play. There's not one level of consistency there. And more effort is needed to obtain resources. Farming begins because humans are starting to lose the ability to survive on their life force. Prana, I guess you can think of it more as like your breath. And the human beings in this time, they start kind of having a hierarchy develop now. Before that wasn't there. We have now like kings and social structures, power hierarchies forming, and people needed rituals, and there were people doing sacrifices of all different sorts to maintain their supposed cosmic connection. and war starts becoming more of a reality. Some people turn towards meat even as a food source. It was still rare. Now coming to the Dwapara Yuga, half of Dharma is like now lost at this point. The human lifespan still long, 1,000 years about. The environmental conditions, there's pollution and climate imbalances that have now become part of the physical reality of Earth. And this is kind of when like agriculture and cities and modern forms of living start emerging. The body begins to also deteriorate faster. I mean, it's literally like an order of 10 less, which is quite a scale. And humans during this time, they have some form of connection to cosmic consciousness, the Shiv layer, but it's weaker. And since human beings have kind of lost their ability to communicate with this greater than life source, there are now these temples and places where idols or different forms of faith to be worshipped. And you kind of start kind of seeing now that if you're worshiping something, you're kind of seeing it as something outside of you that deserves more praise than who you are, rather than as something that is connected to you. So then we have now the Kali Yuga, which is very low dharma levels. It's the human lifespan is 100 years, and it's kind of close to where we are. The environmental conditions are of extreme weather, pollution, natural disasters. Oceans also are polluted, air is toxified, and lots of struggle, lots of scarcity. So clearly, we're in the Kali Yuga. I believe we're like 5,137 years into it. And supposedly, according to the chart, the Kali Yuga is supposed to last 432,000 human years. So we've just kind of hit the beginning of the end, supposedly. And this is where people seek instant gratification, wealth, power, and Maya and illusion dominates reality, keeping people trapped in the falsehood. So Maya, in this case, the illusion would be um, just our physical reality, the 3D structure of things, and even the rules that we have to follow and the exact order it needs to go, and everything that has been put upon us from society that tells us who our person is. That is also part of the illusion. And when people are trapped in falsehood, it's just more so this idea that like they kind of get attached to identity or attached to an event taking place, and unfortunately are unable to kind of see themselves as maybe something beyond that, and yes anding it, because our society kind of says like this or rather than this and that. Big one right here that we see: leaders are selfish and deceptive rather than protectors of dharma, which, means they would have to be leading the right way, having citizens in mind and their well-being and whether they're fed and nourished and whether society is performing well. Diseases, mental illness, and stress tend to dominate human life. We see that a lot in conversation. So it's unfortunate, but it's also a very potent reality. And so when we talk about the fabric of now both the Shiv and the Shakti layer, so we just went through the evolution of these yugas and the definition of them and what it looks like. And just because we're human beings and we have a subjective experience in how we look at things, we kind of see it as this decay, like moral decay, like everything is turning to shit. It's super bad. But the commonality, if we want to kind of make it objective, a little neutral, we can just say Dharma is what continues to decay. Dharma is that fabric that is weaved throughout each point of time. So when we think about the Shakti layer, that physical layer of the universe, so we said that, Dharma is the fabric, and it is also this language of the Shiv layer. So what is the language of entropy? If dharma decaying is a consciousness entropy, then what is a physical entropy looking like? What's that language like? How is that able to show the arrow of time? So the answer is spanda. And just a quick recap on spanda. Spanda is just a term for pulsation, and it exists at every scale within the multiverse, down to 0 point energy at a quantum level where there is this ever so slightest bit of movement and vibration, all the way to gravitational forces, galaxies and solar systems collapsing. Middle level would look like heartbeat levels, circadian rhythms, rainfall, the rain cycle, orbiting the sun, etc. And so, little chart here to see how Spanda shows up in both Shiv and Shakti. I put this chart over here because the same way Dharma shows up mostly and more obviously in the Shiv layer, but it doesn't mean it's not in the Shakti layer. The same goes for Spanda. So Spanda is really well noticed in the Shakti layer of the cosmos, but it does not mean that it's not part of the Shiv layer as well. So if we do a compare and contrast between Shiv and Shakti and how Spanda shows up in both layers, um, Spanda is a pulsation, a subtle vibration. And with Shiva, in the Shiv layer, it is more stillness. It's just awareness, observing, and the ultimate state. It is the thing that remains consistent throughout the concept of time. In the Shakti layer, when we see the universe from its inception to its death, Spanda shows up in its fullest manifest form. And it looks like movement, it looks like energy, it looks like decay, it looks like expression, and it's always in motion. There's always a shift or change happening. There's really no stillness with it. And again, we have gone through talking about the yugas and the one that we're in now, and the symptoms are not looking great. And with all that being said, there's still a push to live in Dharma, which can feel like a lot of work if you are having a misconception of what dharma is. But why would you want to, I guess, as an existential question, why would you want to create order at your little level if everything is supposed to go to shit anyways? So the Shiv layer is eternal. Like the universal field of consciousness. And actually, there's a layer that precedes that, a concept that precedes that, which is going to be touched on in future talks. That's called shunya, which is the void, no thing. So that's actually the ultimate truth, and it's like a core tenet of like Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. But like the spark beyond shunya is this Shiv layer, universal field of consciousness that will always exist no matter what. The Shakti layer is what's malleable. And you can think of that same like pie chart we saw about all of the different yugas and how it oscillates in between. Everything is always going through creation, preservation, and destruction. So when you are living in Dharma, you are speaking the language of Shiv. So no matter what is going on with Shakti, you are still connected in this Shiv layer, and that data in how you behave and your unique soul signature, that gets permanently logged. It's never lost. Interestingly enough, there are some schools of thought that believe that you can actually exit the Kali Yuga early. I don't exactly know what that's supposed to look like on a global individual scale, but maybe it's because there's no like physical look to it. It's more experiential. So more, deeper you get into some of these philosophies, you realize like there's no location or place or thing that this is happening to or with or on top of. It is really just an experiential thing, and other people wouldn't be able to tell that it's happening to you. You wouldn't be able to tell it's happening to them. But exiting Kali Yuga early, I think that would sort of require at a collective consciousness scale, everyone living in Dharma. And if that doesn't happen at a collective level, there's some schools of thought that believe you can actually locally experience that unity consciousness of Satya Yuga in the midst of our current chaotic Kali Yuga, should you be aligned with Dharma. And it is also tied to the idea of like past life samskaras, which are imprints. Samskaras and imprints tend to push you in your current lifetime to have deeper realization. There's, also different belief systems where people talk about the reason why certain people have come again as human beings is for the purpose of reestablishing dharma, having conversations like this, and bringing a sense of balance to the world. So, I mean, with the fabric metaphor, you can think of the universe as a quilt stretching. And of course, like at a physical Shakti layer, the universe is expanding. I believe they say faster than the speed of light. But if you think of a quilt like just made up of grids, the stronger you are connected to your dharma and stick to it, the more that one grid, that fabric, that stitch of the quilt is durable. And just imagine if everybody was able to do that, how strong that layer would be. So yeah, the very fabric of the Shiv layer would be intact for sure if everybody was living in their alignment, and that could probably help kind of subvert being in Kali Yuga for the entirety of the next 400,000 or something years. Or yeah, it's this ability to be able to upgrade a little bit sooner, because living in Dharma connects your individual self, Atman, with the universal self. I'll define this a little bit better in future slides. And this alignment transcends the destruction of the physical cosmos. So what does that mean? It can look like if we're in the Kali Yuga and you have made it all the way up until that would be kind of unfortunate to live the entire time in this many hundreds of thousands of years with it, but maybe you wouldn't even remember or realize it. But if you remain true to your purpose and why you're here, and you are committed to bringing that growth and alignment, not just to yourself, but to others, it in a sense with the philosophy and the culture kind of states that you actually fast track your way into the next evolution and stage when the universe goes through the process of its creation, preservation, now its destruction. And then when it's in this creation phase again and Satyuga begins, the unity consciousness utopia style way of being, you will just kind of come back in that position. And there is actually one more school of thought, but I did not insert it into this talk because it deserves a separate one altogether. Because this talk is more focused on the Shiv layer of the cosmos. And there is a concept called lokas. Lokas are dimensions, and dimensions of our reality are both affected by Shiv and Shakti. And they kind of clue us in as well, as far as like who or what gets affected by the yugas and what time and why and how it interacts at different scales. But that is a separate conversation altogether. The reason I brought the lokas up is also to say that if you are to survive past the point of disillusion, pralaya, or you have died during the Kali Yuga and it is within your unique signature and frequency to come back at a more elevated state, then in the interim, you would reside energetically, experientially in these lokas. I'm making it sound like it's a waiting room. It's a little bit more, actually a lot more complex than that, but that's kind of the idea. But that is not something to overly focus on for now. The point is you want to be connected to Dharma no matter what. And it can kind of feel a bit counterintuitive because if there's entropy of consciousness that's inevitably taking place, then wouldn't trying to be in Dharma be going against entropy? Are you going against the order of the Shiv layer? And actually, that's just not really true. Um, Dharma is always a layer of the cosmos that's always in flow. Here's where it gets controversial. There are pretty bad people we know that are terrible world leaders, and there's also people at an individual level that treat each other really badly, not just here, but in different parts of the world, in different societal structures and civilizations. Without excusing any of that, what I will say is because this is a natural order of how the dharma decay kind of takes place, there is a concept of asuras, which will be touched on in future talks. But people that kind of, the real destruction of everything is stagnancy. Asuras are against that, but not in a positive way. There's this sort of idea that like horrible entities can kind of come as human and like be in this form and they rule and their consciousness is, terrible and they affect people really, really horribly. And that is almost in a way to interact with or to actually inspire a balancing force to restore that sense of dharma. And in that same breath, they are technically living their dharma as well by being absolutely terrible. That does not mean you excuse that behavior. That does not mean you become a bystander. It just means recognizing that the situation we're in is following this cosmic order. And if it calls within you to do something, that is that balancing act. There's nothing external or outside of you that can save you from those feelings. If something calls to you and disturbs you, that is very likely a call to your dharma to actually help restore something somehow. And we'll talk more about how that can show up. So it is like being in the ocean. Like I said, it's a natural progression. If you see crashing waves, you can't stop it from happening, but you can certainly learn how to surf and efficiently navigate the flow whilst enjoying the ride. So, what does it look like for a human being to be living in Dharma? So, this is actually a realization I hit today. Today, that Dharma does not equate to career, but career can be a tool for your Dharma. The human world has conditioned us to believe that our value and success is tied to external achievements, predominantly with the career that you have. That's all we're pretty primed for since the day we're born. Um, yeah, I'm 27 and I was today years old when I like unwrapped that from my mind as I was working on these slides. Dharma is not a job title. The more I've been researching and delving deep, I've recognized it to be a frequency that you exist and radiate your truth at. It's it's a way that creates harmony in the cosmos. And that's not to coddle anybody and make them feel better. You are actually in exact flow. Um, I think that if you can be in flow and encourage other people to be in flow, no exaggeration, you're kind of helping the universe maintain order. So there's no specific way it looks. At least it doesn't need to be externally shown to you. It's something that you can be inspired by externally, but it's really an alignment with your highest nature. It's going to ask you to get to really know yourself, which I think is really fascinating if you think about it, because people feel that they're so aligned to their highest way of being in their like amazing careers, but most people are running away from themselves in their careers, no? Like they stay up super late at night and like they are working weekends or maybe they're avoiding their partner or their families and they're still making the money. They have this idea of success, what alignment is supposed to look like. But they're always, running away. Whereas like Dharma is very different because when you're aligned with that, you actually want to very much be with everything and not escape in any way. And you might not be doing anything specific, but when you know thyself, you are in your highest nature and it allows for your life to also show up in these beautiful ways, which we'll talk about now. What does it look like? What happens when you live in Dharma? So I call this slide personal will, cosmic will, coincidences, synchronicities, because they're quite tied to each other. So you feel a deep sense of peace and truth in how you are living. What you do feels natural and fulfilling, not like effort. That is also something that was very, today years old unraveling thing. Like I know that I've known that I'm a really lazy person in this sense, but when I think about the work that I'm doing right now, it actually does require a lot of work, but it doesn't feel like it because it's just it comes to me naturally. And I also want to point out, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have this absolute natural gift, then that's not your thing. It really is about how these things make you feel and where it makes you vibrate at, so to speak. And then your reality starts aligning without you forcing it. So again, we're working off that principle that your external cosmos and reality is a projection of internal consciousness. So you can also, another water metaphor, it's like being in a river, being in a flow with it, right? If you're going with the current, then resources, wealth, opportunities, connections kind of just start sort of flowing to you. Whereas if you were sort of running against the current, it would be hard to not only catch your own breath and stay afloat, but you can't keep track of anything that's meant for you and it'll, pass you by. So you're in flow, synchronicities, opportunities, and connections just happen, right? And I want to talk about synchronicities because I find that people don't feel any level of legitimacy unless you have advanced to a degree and you experience it. And it's just until then, people that they're two schools of thought and they're so obdurate, they're so stubborn. They don't, well, one side is pretty stubborn. They don't want to come meet the synchronicity folks halfway. But coincidences are things that I feel exist when your personal will is like here and cosmic will is so separate, right? What you are doing, what you want is not in harmony with the cosmos. So any life interaction starts feeling like, oh, everything is random. But then living in Dharma actually looks like co-creating with the cosmos, right? It's not telling you what to do. You're not defying against it. You both work together, and naturally, it will make not just you, but the entire universe happy. So as you kind of start coming together and unify personal and cosmic will into one as close as possible, the things that were coincidences here start showing up as synchronicities. And if people are interested, that can be a whole separate talk too, because there's a way it shows up. And it can actually start amplifying at a very exponential level the faster you tap into Dharma, and that is how you know you are close to your purpose or on the right track. And your existence itself is an active offering to the cosmos. Remember, the cosmos are also not separate from you. And when we think about like idol worship or different belief systems, esoteric faiths, and religions and all of that, we always provide this offering to something else outside of us with the understanding of self-recognition, Shivoham, I am Shiva. It's not sources outside of you. So actually treating yourself to a good life is the same thing as like giving an offering to the universe. And I think that's so much more beautiful than just feeling like you're some enslaved, mindless vessel for like constantly fulfilling these duties that you don't feel aligned in. Like very much what you want is also what everything else wants. So now we're going to do a really quick recap because I know I had mentioned the terms Atman and Brahman. So remember, Brahman is that universal field of consciousness, that super intelligence of all consciousness. Actually, I should have sort of described it as not a universal field, excuse me, but when all forms of consciousness consolidate back into like one, it is everything that ever has been consolidated. Now, Atman, remember the term fractal just means a self-similar nested pattern. Atman is this fractal finite set. And I want to say Brahman is also a fractal to the universal field of consciousness. Everything in the universe is a fractal. But like a subset of a fractal is still a fractal. It is a finite subset of Brahman, but it is attuned to your soul's unique frequency. So, how the Atman operates or behaves. It exists in a state of simultaneity where everything, everywhere, all at once has taken place and is also accessible. It is connected to your current consciousness right now, and it's accessible anytime. It's you can also call it the superposition of consciousness. Like all different realities that could exist for your soul's unique frequency signature. It's like a wave function, and every little micro habit, micro decision you make can collapse that into your ultimate reality. And it's beautiful to think about too, because even when I relate it back personally to myself, being 16 and looking up at the stars and making this really strong promise. It's just I had so much conviction. And then at 10 years later, at age 26, which is a few months ago, I turned 27 November, but I got to do what I promised 10 years later. And I would think like if only that version of Shivani could see me now, like if only she knew that I was able to do this and just how beautiful I cry so much often over this. And I think the conclusion here for me as of right now is I think she did see that, which is why she made that promise. And it's so interesting, right? Like I wonder how much real truth there can be to the fact that the reason we have these deep desires and this audacious command and demand from the cosmos that things must be this way is because it's truly happening somewhere. And it kind of begs the question, like, who are we right now? Are we a fragment of our younger selves, like future projection, just walking around like lollygagging and in their future little dream world? Or is our future selves looking back at us and we're just like a living, breathing entity of a memory of that person's past? But it's not something we can experience and like logically, prove, but it is just such a beautiful thought to have. So Atman is a particular dimensional projection of Brahman. So it is a part of it. They're both connected. If you are able to realize yourself as Atman, you get closer to merging with Brahman. So that's kind of, the goal too, especially with these philosophies, with tantric philosophy as well. It's remember, Tantra is about liberation and expansion, and liberation at a soul level. So soul liberation means exiting samsara. Samsara is the cycle of death and rebirth. And when you exit samsara, there's this idea that like after a certain number of processes and the way it looks, which is a talk for another day, you ultimately will merge your consciousness into this super consciousness, and that's ultimately where everything returns to home. Um, so Atman is actually, I think, the OG version of what we call highest self out here in Western society. And if you want to align yourself with your highest self, you need to be in alignment with your dharma. So, the gateway to recognizing your dharma, how can you do this? How can you even begin? And I say this because whatever your idea could be right now could be a projection of things you were socialized to think is your purpose. I just want to say you kind of come out of the gate like being born knowing what you like. You really never have to look externally. Whatever is your true purpose, whatever is your dharma, is something you've always loved and been interested in. So it's really, again, it is about knowing thyself. But luckily, we have some very interesting texts and things we can reference if we want to understand our dharma without being spoon-fed. And this is important because Tantra is also so much about personal power and your own. This is important because this is how you'll know you made the decision for yourself. As much as it's nice to be kind of told a bit what to do, we really don't want to be told. We just want stability. We want guidance, but we would feel so suffocated if that was the case. So the Shiva Sutras. The Shiva Sutras are that gateway to understanding yourself and your dharma. What are they? What are the Shiva Sutras? So they're basically 77, a book of 77 aphorisms given by Shiva himself to a sage named Vasugupta, who decided to write it all down in a book. Actually, have it with me right over here. And basically, all 77 of them will delineate the nature of reality and consciousness. It's predicated on the idea that everything in existence is an expression of divine or cosmic consciousness, which is Shiva, hence Shiva Sutras. It's extremely potent, but it's also very vague. I have tried dissecting and reading some of the things myself, and I have to spend like a few days actually just honing in on exactly what one aphorism means. So there are three upayas or methodologies to not just understand these aphorisms, but also to realize them. Even though I know this language a bit, I still may butcher the pronunciation, but the three upayas are Sambhavopaya, Shaktapaya, and Anavapaya. So we'll do a deeper dive now into the upayas. And I just want to say too, even like the book is structured with these upayas in mind. So there's certain aphorisms linked to like the Sambhavapaya and then the other two as well. So Sambhavapaya is actually the path of divine grace, like pure awareness. It's a direct realization. Whoa, bam, easy. You didn't really have to do that much work. You somehow know that you are Shiva, right? Like it's only this illusion that makes you think you're separate. There's no techniques needed. It's just pure recognition of the oneness of all things, including you with it. You exist as the infinite, untouched by suffering. Shaktapaya, the path of energy or expanding awareness. So here you'll use mantras, concentration, meditation, higher intellect to tap into Shiva consciousness. You recognize that all energy is Shakti, and through Shakti, you realize Shiva. The way they explain this in mythology too is by putting veils on things. And that's it's not because there's a literal veil and there's some big giant cosmic entity that's like putting on a dress on someone and then taking it off. It's not like that. It is merely a metaphor for realization. Like it is only us that believes that subject and object are separate or that things in the physical world are separate from the world of, etheric thought matter. You merge thoughts with cosmic intelligence, though, using vibration, sound, and devotion to elevate your consciousness. Anavapaya, the path of individual effort and practice. So this looks like a more rigid sadhana. Sadhana means spiritual practice. So you will use breath work, meditation, discipline, probably yoga, an effort to ascend towards realization. And it begins from the perspective of being a limited being, but moves towards infinite awareness. Most spiritual seekers do start here, working on clearing their karma, um, adding to their discipline, and expanding perception. So I guess when you take a look at all three of these, you can sort of tell one takes more effort than the other. And Tantra is a philosophy that also kind of aims to go beyond thinking, okay, only in this life can you do this, and then in the next life you can do that. And I think that's what I love. It doesn't discriminate, and that's what I love about it. And that's why even with the actual like sutras themselves, they break it up into in order the first, second, and third awakening, because depending on where you're at in your journey, and if you want to, you can actually have the direct realization. It really is just the human mind and the ego that makes you feel like you can't, which is why I emphasize with my voice in the first bullet point of Anavapaya how you want to ascend towards realization, assuming it's something way away from you. And there's like the separation there that you have to kind of work towards realizing there's a point where sadhanas, like when people do very austere practices, like for example in 2023 when Shravan, which is a period of time devoted to the deity Shiva, and it consists of having very rigid structured systems because it is something widely available to the public to also elevate their consciousness. And I remember just sticking to it, like waking up at 4 a.m. every morning, doing everything in the breath work, and I felt so great. And I didn't really do it for realization. I just did it for the vibes because I thought it was interesting. But like through that, I was actually able to kind of bypass Anavapaya and actually hit Shaktapaya, where I was experiencing that second bullet point that like all energy is Shakti, and through Shakti you realize Shiva. That was really brilliant waking up and like being in Boulder or being in like a canyon someplace in the morning at 4 a.m. and seeing like the planets and the stars in the sky and just feeling that unity from within. And eventually it does lead you to that direct realization. Why? Because the purpose of sadhana is to at some point not exist. At first it starts as an external practice where it's like breath work, meditation, and yoga. And then there becomes a point where your life becomes sadhana. And that is what dharma is. Dharma is your life being one big sadhana, one big spiritual practice. And as I said before, when you want to understand how you can maybe live in alignment and live in dharma, you kind of come to the Shiva Sutras, which what is the ultimate goal of that? To help you realize that you yourself are Shiva. So in all of this, of course, we went through some topics today that are more concerned with the, if you want to call it mysticism, that's fine. I don't like to separate it actually between scientific and spiritual. They're one to me. But we kind of touched on the dimension or the angle of the spiritual aspect because it offers that completeness. There's already this stuff. It's just so vague and sometimes so difficult to dissect in English that, it often gets kind of dismissed and it's so left to interpretation. So there's not that level of objectivity, but that's where research like this comes in, which is so exciting. And I would say like whatever you're learning or whatever you've chosen to take away, think about what dharma looks like for you, especially that whole idea that it doesn't need to be a career. It can, like, career can be a tool, but what does it mean to be the highest version of you? And my God, is it not like the most self-loving thing in the world? Because when have we been given permission to just be, as if that's enough? To just like be yourself. Because unless you are working in some really hardcore corporate, like, and you've won all these awards, and then you're hustling, you're not sleeping, you're barely eating, and then you also have athletic activities and creative activities. So you feel like you're a boss, you're at the top of your game, and like you're the best, but you're also kind of, there's this idea, I mean, I'm projecting as my idea also, or maybe it's other people's, I don't know, but definitely I know it's me, where you feel like if you aren't doing things like that, then you must be a bum. You're a zombie that's rotting their brain, or what have you. And that's just not true. Like, dharma is human being, not necessarily human doing. But here's the catch. Tantra is non-dualistic in nature. So in human being, you're actually doing. You're not passive. You're talking to people, you're connected, you're in your being, you're in your alignment of being. Being is not nothingness. I don't know where we got that idea from. And similarly, when you are human doing, like if you are cooking for friends that you love, you are creating experiences for your partner if you're on a date, or you are helping somebody, I don't know, if you're saving someone's life, while you're doing, you're also being your highest self. So they're not separate from each other. And it's almost this radical act of self-love, and it requires so much healing. And I almost want to say like the way people project again on top of you how you should be, I kind of liken it to like if you're a human being that's walking, your friends, your family, your teachers, your peers, your colleagues, your boss, they're all giving you like a piece of clothing to put on top of you, and you're like panting and heavy because now you have like 50 articles of clothing and it's super duper heavy, and you move really slowly through the world and you feel this weight and you operate a certain way with these limitations, but you don't know why. Obviously that's, the metaphor version. And the physical version I gave, it's very obvious. You take those layers off, right? Because those pieces of clothing belong to other people, they're not yours, and you don't need all of theirs. And that's sort of what it looks like. And then what happens, right? Like you can start walking a little bit more smoothly. Life and reality shifting for you has a lot more to do with vibration than you think. And that's what the next talk will focus on. So here we focused on more of the esoteric, mystic, spiritual dimension of it. And then we'll start taking a look more at the technicalities of how it actually shows up in real life and why this is not just something to be dismissed as metaphysics. And I would say a little, sneak peek of that is on the topic of the coat metaphor. Really, it's about density. the density of your reality, how much matter has taken form and shape to follow certain rules of physics, is kind of that big blocker between you and the ultimate reality that you want. But what not but and there are tools available to us that can actually help us, not just kind of go away from the things that we dislike, but to find our alignment, and not just find our alignment, but do it for other people, which I find so beautiful. So Dharma is the way to go. And that concludes my talk for today. Thank you so much for listening and paying attention. As always, if you are willing and able to give donations, I am working off of my savings, not looking to ever get back into a corporate position again. And researching this stuff just makes me the happiest person in the world. So if you can, then that's greatly appreciated. But until then, I will see you in the next talk.